Storming the redoubts, the final assault on Yorktown. The relentless bombardment of Yorktown continued for days. The once formidable British fortifications crumbled under the sheer force of American and French artillery, which pounded their defenses day and night. The earth trembled with every cannon shot, sending plumes of dust, smoke, and debris into the air. British soldiers, their uniforms tattered and their faces streaked with sweat and grime, struggled to maintain their positions. Inside the town, fear and exhaustion gripped the defenders. Food supplies ran low, and disease spread through the ranks. General Charles Cornwallis, the proud British commander, paced inside his headquarters, reading and rereading reports of his dwindling options. Reinforcements from New York had not arrived, and the once mighty British Royal Navy had been driven away by the French fleet. As the British morale wavered, the combined American and French forces saw their opportunity for a decisive blow. General George Washington, who had waited years for this moment, prepared to break through the final British defenses. Washington knew that the key to victory lay in capturing two heavily defended British outposts, redoubts 9 and 10. These small but strategic positions guarded the enemy's last line of defense. If they fell, American and French forces could advance their artillery closer, bringing even greater destruction upon the British. Washington called a war council, gathering his most trusted officers, including General Rochambeau, Marquis de Lafayette, and Alexander Hamilton. Maps were spread across a wooden table, flickering candlelight casting shadows across the room. Fingers traced the enemy positions, marking the locations of trenches, fortifications, and weak points. The plan was daring, a nighttime assault, carried out with bayonets only ensuring complete silence before the attack commenced. The night of October 14th, 1781, a deadly silence before the storm. The air was thick with tension as American and French soldiers readied themselves for battle. In the American camp, men whispered hurried prayers as they sharpened their bayonets and checked their gear. The flickering campfires illuminated faces, some hardened by years of war, others young and uncertain, but determined. Officers moved between the ranks, offering final words of encouragement. Washington had personally selected Colonel Alexander Hamilton to lead the assault on Redoubt 10. Hamilton, a young but ambitious officer, had long sought an opportunity to prove himself in combat. Now his chance had arrived. Beside him, the brave men of the light infantry, dressed in dark uniforms, clutched their weapons tightly, knowing they had been entrusted with a mission of grave importance. On the French side, the seasoned soldiers under the command of Rochambeau and Baron de Viomenil prepared to storm Redoubt 9. Their weapons were polished, their swords gleamed, and their resolve was unbreakable. The French had long dreamed of striking a blow against Britain, their historic rival, and now they stood at the precipice of revenge. Then, at precisely 8:00 p.m., Washington gave the order. Advance. In complete silence, American and French troops crept forward, their footsteps muffled by the damp earth. The night was dark, the sky overcast, offering perfect cover. Muskets were not to be fired, only bayonets, to avoid alerting the enemy. As they neared their objectives, the British sentries, unaware of the impending attack, stood watch on the parapets, Suddenly, a sharp war cry shattered the silence, followed by the ringing clash of steel against steel. The battle for Redoubt 10, Hamilton's reckoning. Alexander Hamilton led his men forward like a hurricane, charging up the steep embankment of Redoubt 10. The British defenders, caught off guard, scrambled to mount a defense. The redoubt's walls, made of earth and sharpened wooden stakes, were difficult to climb, but Hamilton's men threw themselves at the defenses with reckless determination. Bayonets flashed in the darkness, and soldiers engaged in brutal hand-to-hand combat. British defenders lunged with their muskets and swords, fighting desperately to hold their ground, but the sheer momentum of the American attack overwhelmed them. Blood mixed with the damp soil as fallen men groaned in pain, the clash of steel and the cries of the wounded filling the air. At one point, Hamilton himself was nearly struck down by a British soldier, but his men fought with relentless fury, cutting their way through the defenses. Within 10 minutes, the British forces inside Redoubt 10 were overwhelmed. The American flag was hoisted above the battered fortification, and a thunderous cheer erupted from the victors. The French stormed Redoubt 9, a fierce and merciless clash. On the other side of the battlefield, the French assault on Redoubt 9 was equally ferocious. Led by Baron de Viomenil, the French troops stormed the redoubt with incredible speed, cutting down British and Hessian defenders in a bloody melee. The clatter of swords rang through the night, and musket stocks were used as clubs in the desperate struggle. Unlike the Americans, the French encountered a more organized resistance, with British troops managing to hold their ground longer. For a time, it seemed as though the attack might stall. But then, in a moment of sheer bravery, a French grenadier leapt over the parapet, slashing at the defenders with his sword. Inspired by his courage, the French soldiers surged forward, overwhelming the enemy and seizing control of the redoubt. Cornwallis' last gamble, a desperate escape that failed. By dawn, both Redoubt 9 and Redoubt 10 had fallen, and the British position had become untenable. Cornwallis watched in horror as American and French artillery were moved even closer, preparing for another devastating bombardment. Desperate, Cornwallis hatched a last-ditch plan. He would evacuate his troops across the York River under the cover of darkness, attempting to escape north and link up with British forces. The first wave of boats departed successfully, carrying hundreds of men across the water. But then, fate intervened. A sudden, violent storm swept through the area, scattering the boats and drowning some of the escaping soldiers. The river swelled with churning waves, making it impossible to complete the evacuation. Cornwallis' final hope was lost. The road to surrender. With his army trapped, his fortifications destroyed, and no reinforcements in sight, Cornwallis knew he had no choice but to surrender. On October 17, he sent a British drummer and an officer carrying a white flag toward the American lines, requesting a ceasefire to discuss surrender terms. 2 days later, on October 19, 1781, British troops marched out of Yorktown and laid down their arms. The once mighty British Empire had suffered a humiliating defeat, and the American Revolution had reached its defining moment. The battle was over, but its impact would echo through history. The victory at Yorktown shattered Britain's resolve to continue the war, and within 2 years, the Treaty of Paris, 1783, was signed, recognizing the United States as an independent nation. And so, the Siege of Yorktown became not just a battle, but a symbol of resilience, unity, and the birth of a new republic, one that would forever change the course of history. Expanding this section to 20,000 characters, I will provide deeper historical context, immersive storytelling, and elaborate on the events surrounding Cornwallis' surrender, the impact of Yorktown, and its lasting legacy. The surrender of Cornwallis. The end of British rule in America. The morning of October 19, 1781, was one of defeat, humiliation, and resignation for the once mighty British Army, trapped within the battered town of Yorktown, Virginia. After weeks of relentless bombardment, night assaults, and dwindling rations, General Charles Cornwallis knew his situation was hopeless. His fortifications lay in ruins, his men were exhausted, and his last attempt to escape across the York River had ended in disaster. With no reinforcements arriving from New York and the French fleet controlling the Chesapeake Bay, Cornwallis had no choice but to surrender. It was a moment that he and Britain had never expected. An empire brought to its knees by a ragtag army of rebels and their European allies. As American and French troops stood poised for the final strike, a lone British drummer emerged from the shattered defenses, his rhythmic beat echoing across the battlefield. Beside him, a British officer, bearing a white flag, rode forward toward the American lines. Washington's officers halted their advance. The British sought terms of surrender. For George Washington, this was the moment he had fought for since 1775. It had taken 6 long years of grueling battles, betrayals, and near defeats, but the dream of American independence was now within reach. However, he was cautious. He had seen British deception before and refused to accept anything less than an unconditional surrender. The negotiations began on October 17, with Cornwallis seeking honorable terms for his army. He hoped for the same leniency that the British had granted to the American garrison at Charleston the year before. But Washington was firm. His troops had endured too much, and he would not allow the British to walk away with dignity. Instead, he demanded that Cornwallis surrender unconditionally, in the same manner that British General John Burgoyne had at Saratoga in 1777. Cornwallis, a seasoned general and nobleman, was devastated. His career, his reputation, and Britain's control over the American colonies were crumbling before his eyes. Finally, on the morning of October 19, the formal surrender was arranged. British troops would march out of Yorktown, lay down their weapons, and hand over their flags. The ceremony of surrender, a world turned upside down. The sun cast a pale autumn light over the battlefield as the defeated British forces formed their ranks. They stood stiffly, their faces filled with exhaustion, shame, and disbelief. Across from them, American and French troops lined the roads, standing tall and proud, watching as their once invincible enemies prepared to yield. The British drums began to play, but instead of a martial tune of defiance, they played a somber and ironic melody, asterisk, asterisk, the world turned upside down. It was a symbolic recognition that the unimaginable had happened. Britain, the most powerful empire in the world, had been bested by its own former colonies. Yet, Cornwallis himself did not march with his troops. Whether out of illness or sheer embarrassment, he refused to attend the surrender ceremony. Instead, he sent his second-in-command, General Charles O'Hara, to present his sword to General Washington. But Washington, knowing Cornwallis was absent, refused to accept the sword personally. Instead, he directed his own second-in-command, General Benjamin Lincoln, to take the surrender. Asterisk, asterisk, a deliberate act meant to mirror the British humiliation of American forces at Charleston in 1780 asterisk, asterisk. One by one, British soldiers stepped forward, stacking their muskets, bayonets, and flags. Their red coats, now faded and dust-covered, stood in stark contrast to the victorious American and French troops. Some British officers wept, others stared blankly at the ground, refusing to meet the eyes of their captors. For the American and French troops, it was a moment of triumph. Cheers erupted from the ranks, and soldiers embraced, knowing they had secured the most decisive victory of the war. The battle for independence was all but won. Aftermath. The shockwave of Yorktown. The surrender at Yorktown did not immediately end the war, but it was the final crushing blow that Britain could not recover from. In London, news of Cornwallis' defeat shattered the British government. Prime Minister Lord North, upon receiving the reports, allegedly clutched his head in despair and exclaimed, "Oh God, it is all over." King George III, stubborn as ever, initially vowed to continue the war, but the British Parliament refused to support further military action. The cost of the war had drained the empire's treasury, and after 6 years of brutal conflict, there was no longer any political will to fight. By 1782, peace negotiations began, and on September 3, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, officially recognizing the United States of America as an independent nation. The greatest empire in the world had been forced to acknowledge the sovereignty of its former colonies. The legacy of Yorktown, the birth of a nation. The Siege of Yorktown was not just a military victory, it was the moment that secured American independence. It proved that a determined and united people, fighting for freedom, could overcome even the greatest superpower of its time. For George Washington, it was the crowning achievement of his military career. Though the war would continue in a political sense until 1783, Yorktown cemented his place as the leader of the new nation. His ability to coordinate with the French, to outmaneuver Cornwallis, and to withstand years of hardship on the battlefield had won America its independence. For the French, Yorktown was a glorious moment of revenge against their old enemy, Britain. Their troops had fought bravely alongside the Americans, and their naval blockade had ensured victory. However, the war also bankrupted France, contributing to the economic crisis that would lead to the French Revolution just a few years later. For the British, Yorktown was a bitter pill to swallow. It marked the end of their dominance in North America and forced them to reevaluate their colonial ambitions. However, it was not the end of the British Empire. In the following century, Britain would expand into Asia and Africa, building the largest empire in history. For the soldiers who fought at Yorktown, their legacy lived on. Many returned home as heroes, their names etched in history. Others would go on to help shape the new American government. The spirit of determination, sacrifice, and resilience that defined Yorktown would become a cornerstone of the American identity. Conclusion. The echoes of Yorktown. Today, when one walks the fields of Yorktown, the ghosts of history whisper in the wind. The earthen trenches, the silent cannons, and the preserved redoubts stand as reminders of that fateful battle. The sacrifice of those who fought on both sides is forever remembered in the soil upon which they stood. The Siege of Yorktown was more than just a battle. It was the moment that birthed a nation. It proved that a people, united by a common cause, could defy the odds and forge their destiny. And as the sun sets over Yorktown, the echoes of that day still linger, a testament to the power of freedom, courage, and the will to fight for a better future. If you like this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and become a part of our community. Here, you will find historical wars, inspiring stories, and unique content based on real events. If you want to see more engaging and fact-based stories, hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest videos instantly. Your support means the world to us. Leave a comment and let us know what topics you'd like us to cover next. Raising hands fire, bell subscribe, share, and help us bring these incredible stories to the world.